point, if you didn't already know, that this is a pretty hardcore, lengthy issue. It's not going to be solved in 5 minutes. So we'll understand if you'll need to leave after our last speaker, Dr. Maha Nassar, who will talk about Palestine. Then we'll let people rearrange themselves somewhat, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So, Maha.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you for your patience as you hear from lots of different speakers about many different rather complicated issues in the Middle East. Hopefully my remarks with regard to the Palestinian case will show that there are some parallels here as well. And I think they all point what I'll be talking about, and I think what all of my fellow panelists have talked about, will point to the need to re-examine many of our assumptions about the dynamics in the Middle East, as well as who is capable of bringing about real change and progress to the region. So first, I'll talk about 3 points with regard to Palestine and the ways in which they also challenge some of our assumptions about who the players are and where change, these winds of change, where they may come from. So the first is that recently, especially over the last few weeks, we've seen much more vocal calls for a more effective and more representative leadership from among the Palestinians. This particularly came to a head about 2 weeks ago with the release of the Palestine Papers, a collection of about 1,600 internal documents over the course of the last decade of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. They were revealed by Al Jazeera, both Arabic and English. They posted the documents on their newly established website, transparency.aljazeera.net. And the documents overall, at least the way that they were presented by Al Jazeera, show that contrary to popular belief and contrary to the calls that we've been hearing over the last decade or so about the need for both sides to make very painful concessions when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, in fact, the Palestinian leadership had been making rather painful concessions over the course of the last 10 years, and in some cases it appeared from the documents even being willing to compromise on core Palestinian principles, whether it was sovereignty over Arab East Jerusalem or the return of refugees. The release of these papers has led many Palestinians to question how effective their leadership is in representing their causes, their cause and their views, and has also led to renewed calls for a more direct election, more direct election of a renewed Palestinian National Council that would represent the views of Palestinians worldwide. This would be a body that would be entrusted, the demands go, would be entrusted with a more serious mandate, a more representative mandate to represent Palestinians in any future negotiations that could lead to a more just and sustainable peace. Second, in recent weeks, we've seen that in response to these growing demands and the demands of others, the Palestinian Authority, the Ramallah-based Palestinian Authority, seems to be increasingly taking a page out of the authoritarian playbook of its neighbors. In recent weeks, they have banned protests and demonstrations in the West Bank among Palestinians in solidarity, marching in solidarity with their fellow Arabs in Tunisia and in Egypt. Last Wednesday, spontaneous demonstration took place in Ramallah anyway, in solidarity with the Egyptian pro-democracy demonstrators. And the security forces, the PA security forces, came in wielding batons and clubs to rather violently break up the demonstration. And so for many Palestinians who for decades, of course, have been struggling to end the Israeli occupation, having an added layer of authoritarian regime does not sit very well with them. And they've also been watching what's been happening across the region and have been following what's been happening through Al Jazeera, through internet websites and so forth, of course through Facebook and Twitter. And that has led to a change in dynamics in the region, which brings me to my last point, which is that the sources of change that are going to be coming and the groups of people that we need to be looking at from among the Palestinian population is not in the established leadership and it's not in the old guard. Like in Egypt, like in Tunisia and elsewhere, it's coming from the youth. And particularly from youth groups that do not have clear ideological or political agendas. They are youth groups that are very firm in their commitment and in their desire to achieve freedom, independence, democracy, and a sustainable future for themselves. A couple of weeks ago, also one such group called Gaza Youth Breakout established a Facebook page, which seems to be this sort of first standard thing one does when one wants to make political change. They established a Facebook page and they issued what they called a manifesto for change that declared their opposition and their they're being fed up with not only the Israeli occupation, not only the blockade, the 4-year-long blockade in Gaza, but also they're being fed up with the Hamas government as well and their abuse of power. And they're very clear that they have no clear ideological or political stances. They simply want freedom, democracy, and liberty, something that it seems, once again, is a theme that we're finding throughout the region. So thank you very much.
Why don't we do this now? If you have, I'd like to just set some ground rules, and thank you all for being patient with the wealth of difference and the wealth of detail, because I think this is exactly what you need to understand about the situation. Let's let people reshuffle a little bit so we have a more intimate group.
Hi, I'm from Algeria. In 1991, when the elections happened in Algeria, the military didn't hesitate to start a civil war, not to let the people. Why didn't that happen in Tunisia? Why Ben Ali left so quickly? Thank you.
Omar or Ahmed?
Sure.
Go ahead, Ahmed.
Sure. At least one thing that distinguishes Algeria from Tunisia. In Tunisia, you have apolitical armed forces. In Algeria, that's not the case. You have a government that is made of a military force. The military rule in Algeria. That's not the case exactly in Tunisia. Plus, there is a lot of Western influence that played into that as well. The French were very clear that that election should not pass, and the Algerian general did exactly what they were told to do.
All right, next.
I want to congratulate Scott for bringing in an important factor that's otherwise been entirely neglected, and that is the geography of the region, which has shaped the history and the politics. For example, at the moment, Sudan, Egypt gathers most of the water of the Nile. Sudan is now pursuing recovering more for themselves. The geography is extremely important, and I would have expected a geographer on the panel to discuss that.
Well, we could put our resident geographer in head on. Would anyone like to address the further implications of water or other geographical features? Dina? Oil, natural gas?
Well, the water issue, there's a lot of, in Al Jazeera and Arab media, there's a lot of talk about, I agree with you, Egypt does take more than the people south of it take from the water share. But there's also a lot of talk that Israel is quite involved in fostering these demands, but and with the gas issue in Egypt, for example, the people in the streets, you can hear there are chants about this, about the condemnation of scandal that has to deal with Egypt supplying Israel with 40% of its natural gas. They had signed a treaty selling the Egyptian national gas to Israel for a fraction of the cost of what it would be on the international commodity markets. And like this summer, there was a natural gas shortage in Egypt, and Egypt had to basically re-import back the natural gas they had sold to Israel, and they imported it back for 7 times the price that they had sold it to Israel for. And there's countless deals that happened this way between the crony capitalists that are allied with the Mubarak regime and Israel. So all of these issues have sort of external dimensions to them.
And I think Fatin wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, when we're going to talk about water and other resources, they really are more important than talking about bilateral relationships and problems in the Middle East. And for today's talk, what we tried to do is look at the domestic and what is going on there and that relationship. And this is why, for the most part, why we don't really touch upon them. But had we been talking about bilateral relationship between the countries in the Middle East, absolutely water, territory, security would be, and natural resources would be at the forefront of our discussion.
Other questions? Johan?
Sorry, I think I have a question. I'll let Lena answer it. Yeah, okay, just hypothetically, if, oh, can you hear me? Okay, hypothetically, if we were like the key strategists for Mubarak, as in...
If we were what?
If we were the, if you were the key strategist for Mubarak, what would he have to do to stay in power?
Die? That's what I would want him to do. Get the hell out.
They're all on. I'm just imagining, like, and the other cat.
To stay on, he's unacceptable. It's over.
Yeah,
There's nothing he could do.
I'm not talking like philosophically whose side we're on, but just imagining we are in the enemy's camp. And sorry, it's just like a hypothetical like strategizing.
Well, he has tried the violent response, but there's only so much you can do. There are millions. No country in the world has produced in recent memory more than 10% of the population on the street. There's.
I know, but I'm just saying like in the worst case scenario for recently I just read that the U.S. lobbyists for Egypt just proved terrorizing. So I mean like what would like the U.S. government policymakers could do.
Fatin would like to take a crack at it.
It's going to be... It's going to be pretty hard right now just because the West has withdrawn their support from, right? The Egyptians, it's not the first time they've protested. People forget a couple of years ago there was this whole movement that began Kifaya, which started, and the Egyptians attempted this, but at that point in time, Mubarak still had enough political clout or enough foreign powers wanted him there. This time, the way the movement started, a combination of things, he does not have that. And so I think it's going to be very hard, and he's beginning to realize it slowly, for him to stay. So he's even began to discuss of stepping down.